To be honest, I wasn't too sure how things would turn out in Boston, and there were a few surprises. This is the 2023 Boston Marathon Race Recap. Let's get into it. If you want to skip all of the travel and pre-race information like the expo, then you can skip to the race details at the timestamp here. On Saturday, 2 days before the race, I woke up at 3:30 a.m. to coach the kids for their 20-mile long run 5 weeks out from the Mountains to Beach Marathon in Ventura, California. I packed light for my 3-day trip, stuffing everything into a Champion backpack and carrying my race shoes in a separate, smaller bag. I got the kids situated, headed out to LAX, and took the long-term parking shuttle to the terminal to catch my flight departing at 6:48 p.m. I had the obligatory airport bar beverage, messaged all my people, and checked on the kids one last time before boarding. I had a layover in Denver for an hour and a half and jumped on a red-eye to Boston, landing at 5:37 a.m. the next day. I barely slept 3 hours on the most important day when I was supposed to get the best sleep 2 nights before a race. The flights were terribly uncomfortable. But after landing in Boston, I got a car to travel to the expo at the Heinz Convention Center and decided to stay in a hotel lobby for a couple of hours until the expo would open at 9 a.m. The hotel lobby was bustling with marathoners, which got me excited despite my fatigue. I made my way to the Heinz Convention Center through the light drizzle as the expo opened to find a sea of Boston Marathon jackets trying to beat the afternoon crowds. I was so tired. And although I had not been on my feet, sitting all through the night had stiffened my legs, and I knew that staying a minute longer at the expo than I needed would not be a good idea. So as swiftly as I could, I picked up my race packet and documented the evidence before getting souvenirs for the kids in what seemed like Christmas crowds doing last-minute gift shopping. It was tempting to visit all the booths and take pictures in front of the photo op backdrops, but I hesitated only a moment before heading out and getting a car to make my way over to my high school friend's home in Cambridge. So I arrived at Andrew's house on Sunday at 11:30 a.m. and had my very first bit of nutrition for the day, a cup of black coffee. We took a walk around his beautiful neighborhood, took in the sights of the amazing 200-year-old homes, scouted out the location of the Porter Square metro station, which I was going to take to the race, and came back to the house for a late lunch at 3 p.m. for my first meal of the day. I decided then that the marathon would take a far backseat priority to spending time with Andrew's family, and that it was more important to appreciate their generosity and kindness than to rest before the race. There would be many more marathons in my future, but I knew in my heart that there would be few moments I would be able to spend with these friends. We spent a wonderful time through the night with plenty of adult beverages, and I managed to get a few hours of sleep before meeting Sam, Andrew's Airbnb guest, who just happened to also be running the Boston Marathon and was in the exact same wave and corral that I was in. Red Wave 1, Corral 3. In a brain fog, I followed Sam to the metro and through the streets where we checked our gear at the farthest end of the gear check buses and lined up with everyone else to board the school bus shuttles from Copley Square to Hopkinton. It was an intensely misty morning and the ground was wet with moisture when we arrived at the Athletes Village in Hopkinton. And it was cold. Upper 40s Fahrenheit. My body was already cold from the bus ride. Since I sat next to the window, and the metal from the school bus body refrigerated my body for the hour-long journey. I was glad that I was wearing my kit. Features mini crew socks, Lululemon Surge half tights, and Nike Aeroswift singlet. And on top of that, joggers, a t-shirt, an old light jacket, a poncho, and gloves. But I was still cold and had to use my space blanket to get some added warmth. Sam had a knit hat that I was envious of, and I made a mental note to wear one next time. We picked a small patch of dry asphalt near the blockade of volunteers leading to the path towards the corrals, and sat down with our small plastic bags that we were allowed to bring to the Athletes Village. Mine had my 21-ounce hydration bottle with 2 Elementi packets of electrolyte, 5 Goo energy gels, all with caffeine, and a trash bag and small towel to sit on in case the ground was wet. I carried my race shoes since I didn't want wet feet before the race started. I wore an old pair of shoes needing retirement while waiting for the start. After about an hour and a half, I took off my joggers, applied Desitin to protect my feet from blisters, especially since it was going to be wet, put on my race shoes, Nike Alphafly Flyknit 1, and we made our way to the corral. The walk to the corral was about a half mile. A lot of people were jogging, but we stayed calm and walked since it was still 40 minutes till gun time. Each corral holds about 1,000 runners, but was not overcrowded. Many athletes had shed their layers already, but Sam and I kept all of our layers on until 5 minutes to go. There were receptacles for throwaway clothing half a mile before the corrals, but sure enough, the receptacles were alongside the corral as well. So we were able to stay warm and follow the rules up until start time. We saved a lot of energy not having to shiver or jog, and I was thankful to follow Sam's model behavior and actions until the gun. And then we were off. Sam was coming off a very loose training block, so he was planning on finishing in around 3 hours and 5 minutes, although he is a 250 flat marathoner. He told me that he would run with me for the first several miles of downhill and say goodbye at around mile 6. I originally contemplated aiming for a sub 2:55 finishing time, but the fatigue was real and it wasn't the right day to go unicorn hunting. So I set my sights on 2:56 and told myself to hold steady at a pace of around 6:45 per mile to start. Okay, so I will break down as many elements of the race as possible using the official splits from the BAA and the data from my Coros watch. There aren't a lot of turns on the bulk of the course, and most of the roads are so narrow and crowded that it's impossible to run to tangents. I even had to hit the brakes on several occasions to avoid crashing to other runners. Okay, mile 1 was super congested and had a giant drop of over 110 feet. It was barely drizzling and the roads were shiny with moisture. There were cracks, manholes, and potholes on the roads, and I was nervous about slipping or tripping. The first mile starts on an extremely narrow residential road, and we were pretty much jogging for the first 30 seconds at 8 minutes per mile pace. But I appreciated the slow start to get accustomed to the slick-looking surface, which turned out to not be so bad once I became desensitized to it. At about 300 meters, our swarm of runners was up to marathon pace, around 6:40 per mile. And I looked up down the long straight road to see literally thousands of runners already making a lot of distance between us. About 100 athletes must have passed us in the next 3/4 of a mile, but Sam and I stuck with the game plan and let them go, and ended up splitting the first mile in a little over 7 minutes. In hindsight, I feel that we saved a lot of quad damage by jogging and capping our speed at marathon pace for the steepest part of the course. Miles 2 and 3 were very gentle rollers, and when I say gentle rollers, I mean they are noticeable on the graph, but pretty flat in real life. However, the overall net downhill made those miles feel quite easy at 6:35 for the second mile and 6:40 for the third. I had a pretty high heart rate even though I felt good, but I think that was due to the abrupt start and the excitement of the race. And we ended up splitting the first 5K with a time of 21 minutes flat, or a pace of 6:46 per mile. I took a mental note of the 1 minute difference between the race clock and my watch time as we passed the timing mat. It was a good start. Mile 4 was another section of continuous downhill for nearly the entire mile with a loss of about 70 feet. I purposefully kept the pace under control here to finish that mile in 6:37. I also noticed that Sam looked so smooth through the 5K split, so I suggested just coming with me to the finish line. He tentatively agreed. Mile 5 had a small half-mile rise about 40 feet that quickly went back down in a 1/4 mile, which brought up my heart rate slightly. but I didn't notice it while on the course and finished that in 6:44. Mile 6 was gentle rollers with a net loss of 13 feet, and my heart rate went back down to 168 beats per minute. For the next 10 miles afterwards, my heart rate remained steady in the high 160s, which is good for me at marathon pace. I can clear lactate at this pace for about 3 hours. We finished mile 6 in 6:43 and split the second 5K in a time of 20:58 for a pace of 6:45 per mile. Spot on so far. All right, miles 7, 8, and 9 were pretty flat and we could really get into a rhythm. Hundreds of people were still passing us, but we stayed on task and split those miles with 6:40, 6:47, and 6:44. And we completed that third 5K with another 21 minutes flat, or an average of 6:46 per mile. At this point, Sam was still looking really good, and we started talking about helping each other through the Newton Hills and crossing the line together. Sam's tentativeness turned to confirmation, and I was excited at the prospect of completing a team mission. Miles 10 and 11 had some hills of 30 feet in both miles, which slowed us down a bit to 6:46 and 6:49 respectively. But I didn't concern myself with that and just focused on running by RPE and keeping my heart rate steady in the high 160s. We were rewarded with a 60-foot decline in mile 12 and split that in 6:46. We completed the fourth 5K in 21:11, or an average pace of 6 minutes and 50 seconds per mile. All right, we split the half in 1:28:47, or an average pace of 6:48 per mile. I planned on negative splitting the second half to finish with 2:56, so I mentioned to Sam that we were on target. I also requested that he yell at me only twice if I faltered in Newton, and to not think twice about leaving me. He just sort of chuckled, and we made our way to the Wellesley Scream Tunnel. Through mile 15, runners had finally stopped passing us. I decided to then tighten the screws and made it through 40 feet of gain in 6:47. I kept on with the pressure on the nice downhill of 100 feet of loss at mile 16 and finished that mile in 6:37. My heart rate dipped down to 164 beats per minute for the first time in the race since mile 1. And also for the first time in the race, I felt like running wasn't a struggle. I was feeling confident. I turned to share the great feeling with Sam, and he just smiled. So I kept quiet to give him a chance to focus. I noticed here runners were coming back to us. Then finally, we arrived in Newton. The first hill was at mile 16 with about 80 feet of gain. I thought to myself that the hill felt really easy, and we ran the steady incline in the high 650s, but accelerated out of the apex to make up for it and finished mile 17 in 6:49. A little past mile 19, I hit the third Newton Hill, a tiny bump that slowed me down to around 7 minutes per mile, and I finished that mile in 6:45. The course leveled off for about 800 meters, and the third hill continued slowing down mile 20 to a time of 6:40. I feel like this is the crux of the Newton Hills because of the false apex in the middle of the third hill. I was slightly discouraged that I hadn't made it to the Heartbreak Hill sign. My heart rate also had reached its apex so far at 172 beats per minute. Still acceptable for me at marathon pace, but the highest. And here we are, the middle of mile 20 and at the foot of the infamous Heartbreak Hill. Crush or be crushed. I was feeling pretty good at this point and appreciated holding back until this very moment. It was hard navigating through the crowd of runners, especially since everyone was running at drastically different paces at this point. The swarm of runners moving smoothly in sync at the beginning of the race was now a hodgepodge of walkers, joggers, and runners. I had difficulty getting around people, so I moved to the far left to avoid the obstacles of struggling, broken-hearted athletes. The crowd support along the side was awesome, and made up for the discomfort of the camber in the road. I finished mile 21 officially by a timing chip in 7:04. In my opinion, my best mile. They actually put timing mats out before and after Heartbreak Hill so that runners can know their split there. Awesome. I knew that coming out of Newton to the finish line would be fast and flat, and for the first time, I felt like I could race the last 10K of a marathon like a 10K, so I did. Thank you, Boston Marathon course. It was a ton of fast course from mile 22 to mile 25, and I split those miles to the Citgo sign in 6:37, 6:45, 6:45, and 6:36. Mile 26 had the right onto Hereford, which was the toughest street of the entire race for 3 reasons. First, it was the first hard turn in the whole marathon. Second, there was a slight rise in the super short 400-meter street that felt worse because of the loss of momentum coming out of the turn. And third, the rise felt even worse because it had already started the shake and bake to finish mile 26 in 6:36. Left onto Boylston, the crowd was deafening. This cannot be overstated. I've never experienced anything like it. I am an amateur runner and mostly coach others. I jog marathons at 6:40 something per mile pace, and I was running to the finish line in a race where spectators were cheering so loudly that it sounded like a continuous roar. Boylston is straight, and I could see the finish as soon as I made the turn. But boy, that was a long 600 meters. I told myself that it was just the usual 600 meter interval and it would be over in a couple of minutes. I gave it all I had running on Boylston at a pace of 6:16 per mile and crossed the line in 2 hours, 57 minutes, and 44 seconds. I came in 3,206th place overall, not quite within the top 10% of the entire field. In my age group of 45 to 49, I came in 231st place, which puts me within the top 5%. Bonus for the additional aches and pains of aging. My finishing time of 2:57.44 came with an average pace of 6:47 per mile, and I barely positive split the race. I think I could have done better on Heartbreak Hill if I would have run on the side of the road from the foot of the hill and didn't have to weave through traffic. Despite that, even splitting Boston is probably the best race strategy for anybody wanting to run for a fast time or a personal best. I carried my own hydration and sipped on my 21-ounce bottle of LMNT electrolyte mixed with water every mile until mile 16. That bottle usually lasts until mile 12, so the cool weather was definitely helpful. Afterwards, I picked up 3 cups of Gatorade Endurance provided on the course and had a small sip each time. I started the race fasted as I normally do to avoid blood sugar spikes and subsequent energy dips. I took a GOO energy gel, which has 100 calories of carbs and some electrolytes on miles 7, 11, 15, 19, and 23, with no problems putting them down or keeping them down. I finished the race and skipped all the goodies except for a tiny banana that was strangely warm. I was reunited with Sam exactly 1 minute and 4 seconds after crossing the line. It was a happy moment. We embraced and just blurted out positive stuff that I have no accurate recollection of. We were both smiling even when the Boston weather dumped rain on us in buckets as we made our way to pick up our gear. We decided to not change into warm clothes since we would be soaked through, and instead shivered our way to the family meeting area. By that time, the rain had stopped, so we were able to dry off somewhat and put on warm clothes that we had left in our gear check bags. As we waited for Sam's family, I noticed others shivering in pain, so I was thankful for our dry clothes since we weren't nearly as miserable as many others who we saw at the meeting area and in the metro. Don't forget to pack your gear check bag with warm clothes. And that's about it. Boston was definitely a unicorn race for me. I don't think I will ever find another experience like it. I went to the start line with the biggest disadvantages possible regarding fatigue and poor pre-race nutrition. I don't think that adult beverages of champagne wine and cocktails count as hydration. And I surely don't think that 3 hours is nearly enough sleep time. But somehow, the superhuman kindness of the volunteers, the nuclear energy of the spectators, and the heartfelt camaraderie of the athletes brought out the best in me on the day. Thank you, Boston Marathon. Hey, thanks for staying with us all the way to the end. Please like this video. It really helps out the algorithm. Smash that subscribe button. It helps out our channel a ton. And you have a great day and a meaningful run. We'll see you in the next one. All right, bye now.